Hey everyone, welcome to London. I hope all is well. I've been extremely bored in lockdown. I've been so bored, I bought a remote which changes the color of my desk. That's how boring lockdown is getting. Anyway, so in today's video, I'm going to be talking about different Z mount lenses, and obviously there is quite a lot of them now. When I first went to the Nikon launch of the original Z6 and 7, there was only a few to play with, but now there's actually quite an array of lenses. So I'm going to talk about my few favorite different lenses because actually they're very expensive. So I want to talk through which lenses I would choose first. Obviously, this has a lot to do with your budget and what kind of photography you do, but I hope you've joined me in this video that you understand that I do a huge array of work, including automotive, landscape, people, travel. So my work is quite varied. I hope you can see talking about these lenses covers a huge array of types of genres of photography. If you haven't already, I'd absolutely love you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. I'm pumping out a ton of Nikon content and other travel work, including tutorials and stuff. But anyway, let's get straight into it. So the first thing to consider is, do you have old Nikon glass and are you willing to use it? Maybe some of you are skeptical going from a mirrored camera to the mirrorless cameras in the Nikon range with the adapter, and thinking, maybe I should get all new glass. Is this adapter good enough? I can completely confirm that the adapter is pretty incredible. I really like it. It just works really well. I was kind of nervous at the launch that, yeah, this adapter, is it really gonna combine the two and work really well? But actually it works super solid. And I think it's a really good way of, first getting into the mirrorless world is using your old glass and then maybe slowly kind of invested in Z mount lenses because they are really incredible lenses. And that's what I've kind of done. I started with like a Z7 with one or two lenses and the adapter and used all my old glass. But now I barely have any old original glass. All I've got is the new lenses because I think they're absolutely fantastic. So let's start off with the first lens I'm using here, which is a 24-70 2.8. This is obviously a very expensive lens. This is £2,000. I think maybe over £2,000, but I think it's one of my favorite Nikon lenses they've ever made. I would say it's my favorite Nikon lens they have ever made. I think it's just so sharp. It's just so fast. I think it's just an absolute perfect focal length for a lot of things. And having the 2.8 really gives a good depth of field. When the first Nikon lens, the 24-70 f4 came out, I used that and that was good, but it didn't give the depth of field that this lens is giving. It's just so sharp. It's so accurate. I really love using it. If you're using an old 24-70, on the original f-mount lenses, I would definitely upgrade. I really didn't like the old 24-70 on those ones. I had quite an old one, but I never found it to be that sharp. I was just struggling with the sharpness sometimes, and I think other photographers did as well. So I would definitely, if you can, get a 24-70. If you can't quite make the leap up to the 2.8, go for the f4. You still get great image quality, but maybe just consider investing a little bit more into the 2.8, just because you're always going to have those lower light moments. You always wanted to get those better depth of field shots, and it's a real investment, this lens, but I think it's 100% worth it. If I could only have one lens with the Nikon Z7, this would be the one. So obviously that's a very expensive lens, and obviously I'm going to get to the cheaper lenses later on. I've used a few with the Nikon Z50 and I want to talk about those a bit further on, but I'm going to keep with the expensive lenses just for now. So the next lens I'm going to talk about is the 14-30mm f4, and Nikon has just launched the 14-24, I think it is, 2.8 version. It's the equivalent of this on the f-mount lenses, and I've always kept hold of this only for one reason, and that is astro work. So over the years, I've really avoided 2.8mm wide angle lenses. Firstly, because this is the Nikon one, it's such a pain to get filters for it. The filter system for this is hugely expensive. It's very inconvenient. So I really do avoid using this for any times I need filters. I literally just bring it around for night stuff. In my work, I've always kept to f4 landscape lenses, and this is because I think the 2.8 versions, especially something like this, has too much, like distortion around the edges. I feel like sometimes when using this in certain aspects of my work, including automotive and people, I avoid a 2.8 landscape lens. I usually use a 24-70, obviously, but there's those wider moments when you need a wide angle, like a 16mm, and that's why I always keep an f4, as I feel like the distortion control is kind of a lot better. You don't get really weird things like it turns ovals of wheels, car wheels, into like weird oval, like egg shape. So that's why I always keep with an f4. Obviously Nikon has just launched, as I said, 2.8 version basically of this, what I was talking about, the 14 to 24 for the Z mount. I would actually preferably, and I have kept with the 14 to 30mm f4. And if you do a lot of astro, maybe the other one is for you with the 2.8. This would really struggle in astro and I'd have to do longer exposures. That's why I always keep one of these. So when I know I'm going to be doing astro for a client, I just bring this along. It's really good, and for the most time I'm using an f4, which is perfectly fine. So I hope all that made sense. So for me, on a landscape lens, it needs to be f4 just so I avoid distortion. I haven't used the new Nikon one, so it's hard for me to be like, that's gonna have the same problem. But historically, a 2.8mm, 14mm-ish is gonna have a lot more distortion than an f4 16mm. So yep, I'm 100% keeping with this one. So the thing as a photographer, in most aspects, you want to step back from your subject and use a bit of compression. And that's when a 70 to 200 is always essential when out on any shoot realistically. And for any kind of people like wedding and automotive, landscape, I love using a 24 to 70. So you might have the option of, this is actually a very expensive lens. So this is probably about £2,500-ish. Very expensive lens, but I think a worthwhile investment. Obviously these are very expensive, so if you don't want to splash out the cash and if you only use them maybe a few times, I'd kind of encourage you to use these more in your work because they are really good, and it's so good to take a step back. Maybe invest in the adapter and then get the 70 to 200 f4 with the f mount lens and just use that kind of setup, because the f4 is still pretty good, it's still pretty sharp, they're a lot cheaper. You can't get as good as depth of field, but you can get those shots pretty well with an f4 lens. And I've used an f4 for a while, and it's a pretty good option. They're also a lot lighter, so this is actually pretty light compared to the old 70 to 200 for an f-mount mirrored camera. This is a lot lighter, but it is still pretty bulky, it's still pretty heavy. So maybe if you only use it once or twice on a trip, or once or twice a year maybe, if you only use it a couple of times a year, maybe get the f4 and adapt it, will save you a lot of money. But if you're really looking to get like a fantastic set of lenses and want to make the investment, this 70 to 200 is absolutely incredible. It's like the 24 to 70. It's super sharp. It's got this beautiful display which shows the millimeter and the focal length. So that's just, I love that little screen there. It's such a cool feature. I've used it in a few different places over the year, and yeah, I really want to keep a hold of this. This is a real essential for me. Last but not least, before I talk about the cheaper Z mount lenses, is obviously prime lenses. And this is something not as important to invest in unless your work is mostly portrait work. So I use a few primes. I've used the 35mm, the 50mm, and the 85mm. My example here, I've got the 85mm 1.8. I really like these. I think they're a really good investment having at least one prime lens. It doesn't have to be, as I said earlier, you could, if you're wanting to save a bit of money, you could go for an older f-mount lens and get the adapter and so, as I said before. But I think these are really nice, they're really lightweight, they're super sharp. I found them ridiculously sharp, so I'm actually really happy, and the depth of field is really good with these. So I would say it's definitely down to your type of work, and you would definitely know if you need a prime lens, especially those portrait photographers, wedding photographers. I mostly use this for details in terms of cars, different things like that, but I think it's a really good lens, really worthwhile investment, at least having one prime lens with you. Having a lens when maybe you're in a tricky situation and it's really low light and you need like a 1.8 or 1.4, it's really good just to have one up your sleeve, just to whack out at any shoot. I think prime lenses have saved me tons of times. So maybe you've just watched all that and you're like, wow, those are all out of my budget. That is about £8,000 or £9,000 of camera gear. And obviously that is a lot of money to be investing, especially if you're just starting out. So let's talk about some of the cheaper Nikon lenses they have to offer. So Nikon are offering a load of Pancake lenses, which actually are really good and they fit well. If you have a Nikon Z50, a Pancake lens is a really good option because you've bought the Z50 because you're starting out in photography, you want a light, compact camera, which has pretty good capabilities. If you want to check out more about the Z50, I'll put a link to my video below. I did the whole launch campaign and I had the camera on an exclusive launch in Italy 3 months before anyone, so I was doing all sorts with it. So yeah, check that out if you want to know more about it. But getting back to the Pancake lenses, are they good? They are good, but they're not incredible. They will do. As a professional photographer, I wouldn't personally choose to use one over obviously the gear I have here, but as a starting lens, it's really good. I was pretty surprised how sharp it was, and I loved how compact it was. I think I had the Nikon Z50 like in a pocket. There's other lenses which I haven't tried, which they have like the 24 to 50 millimeter f4 to f6. And what you've got to watch out for these is obviously the f-stop, because I find a lot of friends in terms of who are more amateur photographers who come to me about tips in terms of shooting, they always struggle with the f-stop on those kinds of lenses. And what it means by f4 to f6 is when you zoom in, it will change f-stop. So by the time you get to the end of the focal length, it will be f6, which is a pain in the arse when it comes to low light. And then you start pumping up ISO, which hasn't got the performance of a Z7. So it's a tricky balancing act. So my advice for someone who's starting out, wants to get a couple of Z-mount lenses, but doesn't have the biggest budget, I would firstly consider what their lenses are going to be used for. So if I was wanting to be travel on the go, I would go with a couple of Pancake lenses Nikon offer, maybe the 24 to 50 or the wider version, which is the 16 to 30, I think. Or I would get the adapter and use my old glass for the time being. But I would definitely consider start to invest in Nikon Z mount glass. It is superbly sharp. I think it's superior over F mount glass. And yeah, I think they're really making huge strides. So as a summary for me, if I could buy 3 Nikon Z mount lenses, I would go for obviously the 24 to 70 millimeter, 2.8, the 2.8 70 to 200, and the 14 to 30 f4. Those are the first 3 lenses I've got, and I really love using them. I think they're a great combination. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please do subscribe to my YouTube channel and check out my other editing tutorials. Anyway, have a good day.